Zero appetite, the most irritable with people I have ever been, and completely anxious to the point I couldn't do any work. In this video, I'm gonna share with you what too much medication has felt like on Vyvanse, Adderall, Concerta, and Ritalin. Quick side note, don't forget to download the free guide in the pinned comment below because one, the content's awesome, but more importantly is I send out exclusive items to my mailing list like free live training classes and more. So I will see you on there, and now, back to the video. Welcome to Hidden ADD. I'm your host, Aron, where I share the strategies that I use to go from broke, divorced, and earning minimum wage to a successful Fortune 500 career, happily remarried, and now an entrepreneur. If you're new here, my next video is on must-have software tools for ADHDers that I personally rely on every single day. So subscribe and hit the bell if you want to get that. Now let's get into the video. Okay, so let's get into the symptoms. So I'm gonna put a chart on the screen, which is gonna show 4 dimensions across the 4 drugs. So as you'll see, I'm gonna break down for each drug the impact on my physical being, my mood, my focus, as well as my interaction with other people. I'll share my experience with Vyvanse in just a moment, but let me just take 30 seconds to explain why I would have an experience with too high of a dose or an overdose of these drugs. So when you're trying out these medications, you would look for the most effective dose. And so for instance, on Vyvanse, I started at 30, and then I was curious to try 40 to see what impact that would have, and then I went as high as 50. And so that's where I have the experience across these 4 drugs. So let's get into Vyvanse. For Vyvanse, when I reached too high of a dose, which for me happened to be 50 milligrams, the symptoms were immediate. So the first one was physical. My heart, I could have sworn it was gonna jump out of my chest. You know how sometimes you can feel your blood pumping in a certain area of your body? It was like that, but for an hour straight. The other physical impact was my appetite definitely dropped significantly. It wasn't as bad as what I'm gonna share coming up on another one, but it definitely dropped. All right, so in terms of focus, my focus was actually pretty good. It wasn't bad. A lot of other drugs, which you'll hear about in a moment, can actually screw up your focus by just getting you too locked in. It wasn't actually bad. So let me go now to mood, because that's where things got bad. I was so anxious, right? If you imagine your heart beating so fast, and it was just like, I just had way too much coffee. So what I will say is that the anxiety colored everything else. So it did make it harder for me to sit still and focus on something because my mind would just race to other things. Also, and this is a great segue to the last impact category of people, I was much more anxious interacting with people, like, well, kind of jittery and needing to wait to respond, and that was definitely not great. And so I rated it at medium for people in terms of impact. Okay, moving on to Adderall. Physical was a high. So the heartbeat, it actually wasn't bad, but my appetite was 0. I could not have stomached food if I tried. On focus, the impact was low. I could still mostly focus on what I needed to get done. People was a medium. I had kind of like a really intense sort of stare going, like when I'd be interacting, but it wasn't as bad as what I'm gonna share with another drug. Mood was also high impact. Interestingly, it wasn't while I was on the medication. It was afterwards. I felt like just like a drugged out zombie. I was just like, and that lasted that evening as well as into the morning a bit. It was terrible. Too high of a dose for me on Adderall was 15 milligrams of instant release at one time. But again, it doesn't matter exactly the amount. It's just these were my experiences when the dosage exceeded what worked for me. Okay, let's talk Ritalin, too high of a dose. On physical, it was low impact. However, that's where the low impact ends. But in terms of physical, really no heartbeat issues at all. And in terms of appetite, it was definitely less, but nothing near like the Adderall appetite loss. So now let's get into focus, where things start to get ugly. With too high a dose of Ritalin, I am hyper-focused, lasered in, which sounds really delightful until I am formatting and changing the color of an icon or some text 5 and 8 and 10 times. It is an absolute black hole of hyperfocus, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not get myself out of nitpicking the smallest details. The other problem with my overarching supersonic focus was that any emotion that was negative, the minute I was feeling it, I could not shift moods. An example would be if something stressful happened, or I had a stressful conversation or a stressful email came in, I would just be so overcome with emotion that I couldn't really focus on other work. With people, I also rated Ritalin a high impact for 2 reasons. 1, because of the supersonic hyperfocus, I did not want to shift my focus to talk with people. And if I did talk with them, my intensity was so overbearing that it was challenging. And then secondly, I was way more irritable and impatient. And so that made my interactions with people really challenging, because if you remember what I said about getting hyper fixated on a negative mood and just focusing on it, as soon as I was irritated with somebody, which I was more likely to be, I couldn't get off of it. And finally, for mood, I gave it a medium impact rating because I feel like the irritability was covered under people and the over focus on negative emotions was covered under focus. So those are not ideal, but they also don't always happen in terms of my actual just emotional experience on it. If I don't get into those rabbit holes, it wasn't a overly negative emotional experience. Before I get to the last drug, Concerta, if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. My goal is to hit 250 likes, and I would appreciate if you could help with that. Also, I'd recommend checking out the free guide in the pinned comment. I put a lot of work and knowledge into it, and people who have downloaded it have just said that it gave them really great insights in a very ADHD-friendly summary form. On to Concerta. So with Concerta, I would say physical was low. My appetite was a little bit less, as it is with any stimulant, but it was the least affected of any of the other drugs. In terms of other physical symptoms, heart rate was fine. I do feel this sort of weird like tightness in my skull, which I don't know how to describe any other way. It probably has to do with my intensity, but that would be the physical. So I gave that a low. Focus, I gave a medium. I definitely get some of the super hyper focus of Ritalin, but not as severe as Ritalin. People, however, was high. That was bad. The intensity that I get leads to irritability, and the challenge with me and people interacting is that conversations are unpredictable, and I really get impatient and lost with all the meandering, and I'm just straight line ahead. And finally, for mood, I put medium, although I was on the fence for putting high. The mood issues for me with Concerta, again, was just really the irritability. However, what I will say, and this is different than the Ritalin overdose, if I don't have people or distractions throw me off, it wasn't a negative mood experience with the Concerta, which is why I gave it a medium. It was, again, kind of just that intensity of focus. So it's not like the most comfortable, enjoyable thing, but at least I could still get stuff done. And in terms of dosage for me with Concerta, I believe it was 54 milligrams where I felt that intensity of dose was too high. Did you enjoy this video? If so, please like it and help me get my goal of 250 likes. And as far as what I shared in this video, I'm just one perspective. Did you have a similar experience when you've been on too high a dose of an ADD med? Let me and the community know so that people get a sense of if my experience is universal or if others had something different. And then finally, my next video is so awesome. Basically, I'm gonna cover technology tools that are absolute game changers. These are not common ones. You probably don't know at least half of them. So if you don't wanna miss that video, click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you get notified when it comes out. That is it. I love you, focus friends. Thank you for hanging out with me. And the algorithm thinks that you will enjoy some of these videos. Check it out, and I'll see you soon.